Typically one day in middle age, the sufferer begins to have trouble sleeping and tries compensating with a nap in the afternoon, but to no avail. Once the sufferer can no longer sleep, a downward progression ensues as he loses his ability to walk or to balance. Perhaps most tragic, the ability to think remains intact. Only the desperate look in their eyes shows that they know what is going on.
Welcome to Something's Killing Me. I'm B.D. Wong. Imagine the torture of a life without sleep. If every night was a sleepless night. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it can actually happen. Tonight, meet 3 families on 3 continents, all in a race against time, fighting a mysterious disease that leaves its victims in a nightmarish netherworld.
My name is Hayley Webb. I am from the Gold Coast in Australia, and I am a television reporter.
Paramedics took him to hospital in a stable condition where he's now been given the once-over by doctors.
My name's Lachlan Webb. I'm Hayley's little brother. Much taller, much better looking.
I'm used to reporting stories. That's what I do for a living, but I'm certainly not used to becoming the story. That's exactly what happened to Lockie and I in 2012 when our mum got sick.
Anyone that knows Mum knows that she was the place to go for dinner. She was, you know, she was a great cook.
Like you have a party when you're a kid, maybe if you're 18th or something like that, and instead of getting food in, she'd cook for 80 people.
She was the ultimate caregiver, yeah. And just my best mate. In 2012, we went on a family vacation to a beach. We noticed that Mum had lost a lot of weight.
She looked good.
She looked amazing.
Yeah.
It was my birthday a month later.
We've loved the 21 years, we're looking forward to the next 21, and we're looking forward to you all being here to celebrate all of those with us. So thank you all.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.
We all went out for a lovely dinner together.
Thanks, Mum and Dad, for putting the show on.
And then after the dinner, Mum and Dad sort of sat us down and said, we have something very important to tell you. She said, look, I'm so sorry to do this to you on your birthday. This isn't a discussion to have over the telephone. I have 6 months to live. A month later, she was showing signs of dementia. She was calling me by the wrong name. Was having mild hallucinations, was falling over. You could tell we were losing her. Very fast degradation over the next couple of months. She was never able to get into that reparative state of sleep. And so you're in this grey area, in this limbo land between being awake and being asleep because your brain is so exhausted that you get into a perpetual stage of a dream. You are in a constant state of dozing for 6 months, basically.
I was in my second year of law school, so this was 2010, when my mom started to get sick. It wasn't easy to sort of assess how worried should I be or how worried was anyone else, because the first things that came up seemed like things that come up.
No one really put the dots together that that was a syndrome or a disease or anything. It just seemed like some weird stuff was going on. We got married in August 2009 in Western Pennsylvania.
This is the purpose of my life, to be with you, to protect you, to honor you, and respect you, and make you part of my life.
It was a small Indian wedding, by which I mean 300 people. Sonia's mom was fantastic. It was her big day. You know, she had planned the whole thing.
She was healthy, she was happy at the wedding. I think among the happiest I can remember seeing her.
A few months after that, we came back to Sonia's parents' house for New Year's. Sonia's mom was healthy, seemed totally normal, nothing was wrong. We were only there a couple of days, but I didn't get a vibe that anything was out of the ordinary. And within maybe a month or two after that, we got a phone call from Sonia's dad that her mom wasn't doing so well, and it wasn't clear what was going on.
She was having a little bit of trouble with her eyesight. She started losing weight pretty rapidly. She had a couple incidents of forgetfulness.
Sonia's grandmother said that they'd been driving and her mom had made a judgment error and got into a minor accident. It seemed like out of character.
This is where people started to get really worried. She was taken around to a bunch of neurologists.
By the time that we saw her again, she couldn't recognize us, was speaking in tongues, was in a state of profound dementia.
She would have vivid hallucinations. She would have bouts of paranoia about things that didn't make sense. She would try to communicate them to us. She would get angry when we didn't understand.
I think that they must have done every test imaginable. Maybe this is a microscopic brain tumor that's too small to see on any of the imaging techniques we have. Maybe it's heavy metal poisoning. Maybe it's Lyme disease.
There were a lot of muscle jerks and spasms, and she was fitful and couldn't really tell you if she'd been awake or asleep. It's very hard to say how much sleep or how much rest a person is getting when they're in that state where they can't communicate or function normally.
Every theory was thrown out there, but none of the tests came back conclusive for anything.
And this is with my dad being a physician and able to be a tremendous advocate. It was still a huge struggle every day. By fall, my mom was on various forms of life support. She had all sorts of tubes and wires and needles going into her all the time. She looked like she was being tortured. As time passed, the road out of life seemed more merciful than the road back to health. It almost seemed like, how could we ask this person to keep going? I think death, losing a loved one, was more understandable than this mysterious, debilitating disease that might go on who knows how long and has no name.
On another continent, there's a third family that have the same condition, and they've had it for centuries. People in this town, in this area, would speak of a family curse, and even the family itself would sometimes talk of a family curse.
Maledizione, the curse, or family's curse.
Two women are struck down in the prime of their lives by a rare and strange disease. The symptoms include rapid physical decline, dementia, and an insomnia so severe the victims are unable to sleep for the last several months of their lives.
You know, there's only one thing worse than not getting enough sleep. And to my mind, that's not getting any sleep at all.
It was a really confusing time. Since my dad's a doctor, I think getting a sort of final diagnosis seemed important to him.
We'd been home in Pennsylvania for a family friend's engagement party. Just before we left, Sonia and her dad had a conversation.
My dad sort of took me aside and said, before you go, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Mom. We got her autopsy report. Her disease was genetic. Sort of in one breath, he conveyed both the idea that I was at risk and the fact that I had the option to be tested.
I didn't know what had happened, but then when we were driving to the airport, it was dead silent in the car. And I was like, what just happened? What's going on here? And it wasn't until we had gotten on the plane that Sonia told me what she had just learned. And I just felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. I was just crying and bawling and like clutching Sonia with both of my arms and like wheezing and couldn't get enough air in.
The initial feelings were just like absolute sadness and absolute fear. And it was probably the first 24 hours or so, it was hard to feel anything else.
We called in sick to work the next day and just spent that day trying to figure out what this even was. What is this disease? What are we up against here?
For me, there was a 50% chance that we could close the book on this and resolve it, and that I could give my dad and Eric peace of mind. And on the other side, the 50% chance that I had inherited the mutation from my mom.
For us, there was no decision of whether to get tested. From the moment we heard about this, we were like, well, we have to know.
My family has a disease. It's a genetic disease, which is pretty insidious. My grandmother died of it, my auntie, my uncle have died of it, my mother has died of it. We knew that there was a 50-50 chance that both of us had it. I always assumed that I had it. I always assumed that Lachlan would be negative.
We knew that we could be tested basically at any point. Obviously, after our mum passed away,
you can't just go and get a blood test and find out. You have to go to a genetic counsellor. That genetic counsellor then has to do an evaluation with you to see if you are mentally stable enough to receive the results. He spoke with us, realised that we're both sane individuals, we're fairly stable. And we probably held on to the blood test form for 5-6 months before we worked up the guts to go and actually get it done. We went into the genetic counsellor's office. He said, look, I'm very sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's the worst case scenario. You both have presented with the gene.
I think I was more devastated about Lachlan's diagnosis than my own, because I just wasn't expecting it. And you know, I'm the big sister. I'm just like, I want to protect him. He's my little brother.
for me, it was sort of like, okay, like, that sucks, but let's just get on with it. Obviously, then Hayley being positive as well, it was like, you don't know what the journey is in front of you, but at least you're in it together.
Just got to focus on the good, because there's nothing you can do to control or reverse the bad. And there is a whole lot of bad in this situation.
On another continent, there's a third family that have the same condition, and they've had it for centuries. Well, I first heard about the story from a neurologist in Chicago. He said to me on the phone, he said, I've just had a patient who died from insomnia. And I said, that's impossible. Nobody ever dies from lack of sleep. I got to come and see you and hear all about this extraordinary disease that I don't know anything about. And he said, wait, there's this family in Venice who've had this disease for 200 years. People in this town, in this area, would speak of a curse, of the family having a family curse, and even the family itself would sometimes talk of a family curse.
Maledizione, the curse, family's curse.
This is an era with huge families. You'd have 14 kids in a generation, 6 or 7 of whom would die from the disease. Doctors were stumped. They listed the cause of death as nervous exhaustion, encephalitis, even schizophrenia. The family kept the disease hush-hush until a family member named Silvano came down with symptoms. Silvano was determined to get to the bottom of this disease that had tormented his family for so long. He was very handsome, movie star good looks, charming, charismatic, all eyes on him in the room. It all started when Silvano was on a cruise with his mother. He notes that when he's dancing with her, he's sweating uncontrollably, which is one of the first symptoms of the disease. And then he goes and looks at a mirror and he can sort of see that his face is changing. You begin to get this look. You begin to lose weight and your eyes change. Your pupils become these little tiny pinpricks. And I think at that point he knew. He even said to a friend, he said, well, I've got it. And he was just 53 years old.
Silvano told me, Pietro, I'm gonna tell you that in few months, I'm going to die.
They knew they had something remarkable and they weren't gonna let it get away. They put a camera in a room and they taped Silvano's decline.
Death by insomnia. It's rare, but it does happen. The first known case, a family in Italy. For centuries, they suffer in silence. But when a family member named Silvano falls ill in 1984, he wants answers. He checks into the renowned sleep clinic at the University of Bologna in Italy.
Silvano has his intake interview, and this young neurologist, Pietro Cortelli, sits down with him and takes this amazing list of symptoms that he's never seen before, involving this inability to sleep.
What Silvano was telling us was that he was always awake and that he didn't feel any sleepiness. Silvano told me, Pietro, I'm gonna tell you that in few months, I'm going to die. I say, well, you are pessimistic in this moment, you are probably a bit depressed, and stop me immediately and say, well, Pietro, I'm not pessimistic, I really know exactly what is gonna happen to me. This is one of the few chances you have to discover what is the cause of the course of my family.
Cortelli and his boss, Elio Lugaresi, who died in 2015, knew that they had something remarkable, and they knew they weren't going to let it get away. So I think they threw everything they had into it. And so one thing they did is they put a camera in a room, and they taped Silvano's decline.
This was done 2 months before he died.
His eyes are sort of half open and half closed. The lid's kind of partly down, but what's oddest is that the eyes don't really seem to be focusing anymore. And his head kind of drops down and then it pops back up.
Exactly what you can feel if you get a sleep attack when you are driving. You are falling asleep and then you wake up, whole body jerk.
The look of fatigue on his face is just overwhelming. He's like a figure like from an Edgar Allan Poe story who can't sleep but also can't quite wake up. A lot of people ask, why didn't they just give Silvano sleeping pills? But in fact, they did try to sedate him, but it would just put him in some sort of coma. Not the true deep sleep that refreshes you and restores you for the next day.
The first two stages are lighter sleep, and then you get into the deeper, more restorative sleep at stages 3 and 4. For the restorative sleep that we think of in terms of healing our bodies and our brains, being able to lay down new memories, remember things for the next day, a lot of that is most impacted by getting enough of that deep sleep, stage 3 and 4 sleep.
Silvano was trapped in what's called REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. It's the light phase of sleep where most dreaming occurs. Silvano did a lot of dreaming, and he even did what's called enacted dreaming, which is he would actually act out his dreams. I believe in that video that he's combing his hair, or he's imagining, so he's sort of doing the gestures of combing his hair.
There are some pieces of this video in which you can see him doing what he was dreaming. And in one of these occasions, he got up, and I was there. I say, what was going on? And he told me I was dreaming to give a flower to the Queen of England.
Silvano knew he wanted to donate his brain to science to get to the bottom of this family mystery, and Dr. Lugarese also knew he wanted the brain. And he knew where he wanted to send the brain. He wanted to send the brain to a former student of his named Pierluigi Gambetti, who was Italian born and raised and trained, but lived in Cleveland and was a professor at Case Western, a pathologist at Case Western. So they put the brain in dry ice and they shipped it as fast as they could, and they got it to Gambetti.
My name is Pierluigi Gambetti, an Italian name, obviously. So Lugarese, my mentor in Bologna, when I said that I was about to go to examine the brain, and he said, look at the brain stem, that is the lower part before the spinal cord, lower part of the brain. And I said, I will look everywhere. I will look everywhere, including that area.
You know, he does what pathologists do. He does a lot of very, very fine slicing of the brain, trying to figure out what's wrong with this guy. Like, well, this part of the brain looks good. You know, the frontal cortex looks fine. This part, that part, they all look good. But then it gets to Silvano's thalamus, which is a part of the brain that's not well understood, but appears to operate like a kind of switchboard. The thalamus is composed of nuclei. The nuclei impact movement, memory, reasoning, even consciousness. Well, 90% of the neurons in 2 of the nuclei in Silvano's thalamus turned out to be completely destroyed. So we now knew that those 2 specific nuclei were crucial to the sleep-wake cycle.
Almost all of them were gone. So it was a very specific attack, in a sense, by the disease.
2 years after Silvano's death, the Italian team publishes an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they finally give the disease a name.
Lugarese said we have to find a simple name of the disease. And he told, well, the disease is fatal. The disease is familiar. So called fatal familial insomnia.
Fatal familial insomnia, and that's a name that, you know, is unforgettable. It's the first time I was told that name. I knew immediately I had to learn more about this disease.
Lachlan and Hayley Webb here. We've just arrived in San Francisco. We're here to take part in some clinical trials at UCSF.
We're here to be guinea pigs. This is what we signed up for. And it's half an hour of pain for what could potentially be a cure in the future, so it's a no-brainer.
Welcome back to Something's Killing Me. I'm BD Wong. Fatal insomnia, an unimaginable illness that ultimately leads to death. One family in Italy has been afflicted since the 1700s. In 1986, Italian researchers finally gave this mysterious illness a name: fatal familial insomnia. But what causes FFI? And could there be a cure? researchers were on a mission to find out.
After the study on Silvano was completed, we received additional brain tissues from the family affected by FFI.
One of those family members was a distant cousin of Silvano's named Teresa. Out of nowhere, she started bumping into furniture, acting confused, and showing the symptoms of FFI. Teresa might have been the saddest case they ever saw in Bologna because she was so young. She was just 36 years old with 2 little boys. Poor Teresa, she had these dark circles under her eyes, and she had this 1,000-yard stare. She suffered horribly.
I took some photos to her to help her realize who I am. I am your sister, I kept saying, but she didn't recognize me. She couldn't speak. She couldn't understand what was happening to her. It's really so devastating. Because with Papa, with Teresa, and then my brother, I knew all the things that were happening from the sickness. It's been a disaster, a brutal suffering.
No one knew it at the time, but Teresa was going to wind up being a key piece of the research puzzle for the Italian team. Her brain tissue, along with that of another cousin, turned out to help them make a stunning discovery.
I noticed a limited area containing what we call spongiform degeneration, so that in that particular area, the brain looks like a sponge. At that moment, I knew what FFI probably was, because spongiform degeneration is a typical lesion of prion diseases.
Prion diseases are something that we weren't even really taught in medical school. This is still in the sort of context of medical history, it's a relatively new thing. We definitely first heard about prion disease in animals, and mad cow disease was one of the big ones. But I think for a long time there was still a disconnect between it being able to actually cause disease in humans.
There's this one protein that's sort of at the heart of this disease, the prion protein. This is a protein that we all have. We're all producing it all the time, and it's part of normal biology, but it's capable of undergoing this, basically a change in shape.
Certain proteins can misfold, and when they misfold, if they touch another protein of the same kind, they can cause that protein to misfold.
You had one abnormal and one normal. This occurs, and now you have 2 abnormal. Then the 2 do the same.
So you can think of it as sort of a domino effect that spreads across the brain. And as these prions spread, they're killing brain cells in their wake.
It was always thought that disease could only come from a virus or a bacteria. And now there's this third thing, a prion, a non-living organism that appears to be causing disease, and it violates the most basic principles of science.
There's one center in the United States that does all the predictive testing and the diagnostic testing for prion disease. The blood sample was sent there. I believe it was about 8 weeks of waiting for the result.
The longest 8 weeks of my life. I just knew that our life as we knew it was going to be different if Sonia had this mutation.
Being in limbo was the hardest time. And it was really hard to think about anything else. We ended up spending 2.5 of those 8 weeks in Japan.
We were just kind of out of it and off schedule and just wandering through the world a little bit dazed the whole time.
And yeah, and then we came back.
Got the results.
Got the result.
Lachlan and Hayley Webb here. We've just arrived in San Francisco. The weather is pretty miserable, but that's okay because we're not here for sightseeing. We're here to take part in some clinical trials at UCSF.
Yeah, the university is pretty much the only place in the world that is doing research into the disease that is FFI. FFI killed our mother about 4 years ago. We were diagnosed with the disease about 1.5 years ago, so we are just desperate to do anything and everything we can to help the research process along and hopefully find a cure before it's too late.
Hayley and Lachlan are back at our center for their second follow-up visit for my research program.
We've really looked at this from, you know, your mom's generation, maybe your grandma's generation, but then it becomes a little bit mysterious.
For Hayley and Lachlan's grandmother, it's possible that she was the first person in the family to develop the disease because she's the first person to have an error in her genetic code. But it's also possible that mutation has been in the family for generations, but it just, people have died before they developed the disease.
It's just a typo. It was a typo in my grandmother's DNA.
It's evolution, right?
And it was a typo that has unfortunately been passed on to the future generations. A deadly typo.
You're sort of like steeling yourself for the outcome that you fear.
Doctor's exact words were,
The symptoms of fatal familial insomnia usually appear around the age of 50. Hayley and Lachlan Webb, both around 30, are in a race against time. They've gone public to push for a cure and to raise awareness.
The most frustrating thing about FFI is the misinformation and the misunderstanding. They see the sensationalist headlines and they think that Lachlan and I haven't slept in 30 years. That's so not true. I can't even stay awake through a whole bloody movie. Like, I'll fall asleep like that, given the chance. So that's untrue. The other headline that was doing the rounds was meet the brother and sister who will die if they ever fall asleep. Again, so ridiculously wrong.
Many prion diseases are 100% penetrant. That means if you have the mutation and you live a long enough life, with 100% certainty you'll develop the disease. The mutation that they have in their family is essentially very close to 100% penetrant.
The other night I had a dream. I had a dream that I had triggered and I was told I had 4 months to live, and it seemed so real.
I'm about to go inside to do an MRI. That's where they'll look at different cross-sections of my brain and check out what's going on inside there.
We're looking to see if we can find change in brain volume, if certain parts of the brain are shrinking over time. And that's why we ask people to come back for multiple visits, because if we just get them one point in time, we're not able to detect change.
Stare at the dot. 3, 2, 1.
The back of the eye is a view into the nervous system. It's a window into the brain. So we think what is happening in the back of the eye might also be happening in the brain, which we cannot see as easily.
That top layer, this white layer, those are all the nerves. And we're looking specifically at how thick that layer is.
If I'm overly tired and my brain gets, fuzzy. You know when you get fuzzy brained when you're really exhausted, and I think, crap. Could that be a symptom? And then I think, no, you're just tired. And then I go to bed and I can't sleep. I think, crap, is that a symptom? Subconsciously, you can't help but be scared. It's just, it's terrifying.
We got Sonia's genetic test report. The doctor's exact words were, "The same change that was found in your mother was found in you."
The same change that was found in your mom was found in you.
We were grieving, we were thrown for a loop, didn't know what we would do next.
I think that first weekend we just sort of spent time together and didn't talk that much about it. We had a friend come over who was a scientist. He brought sort of a different outlook with him than other folks and said, I don't want you guys to despair about this. There are people out there working on this disease. This is when we started trying to read whatever we could find on the internet about prions.
We were looking everything up on Wikipedia and then trying to read these scientific papers that were incredibly dense.
About a month in, I quit my job. I started going to MIT during the day, walking into classes and just sitting in lectures on biochemistry or protein folding. I also was taking a night class in molecular biology at Harvard Extension School. My thought was, I'll take a sabbatical from my normal life because this is something that's going to be important to us from now until the end.
Proteins are released from brain tissue into the spinal fluid, and so we can get a snapshot of what is happening in the brain.
I think there was many years where the feeling around FFI in our family was woe is me. We knew that there was nothing we could do. We knew it was a death sentence. It was to a degree swept under the carpet. But I think in the last year, in the last 2 years, in the last 3 years, there's been such huge progress and such huge medical advancements that there is optimism now. There is hope for a cure. We're about to do the dreaded lumbar puncture. Last time I did it, it was quite painful, very painful, in fact.
The lumbar puncture, also known as a spinal tap, what we get from that is we take the cerebrospinal fluid, which is a clear liquid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord. Proteins are released from brain tissue into the spinal fluid, and so we can get a snapshot of what is happening in the brain.
It's scary. I mean, they're putting a huge needle into your spinal cord and sucking out your spinal fluid.
All right, good luck.
We've been told time and time again that the two most important parts of this clinical trial is the lumbar puncture so that they can get your spinal fluid and the MRI. And so we're here to be guinea pigs. This is what we signed up for. And it's half an hour of pain for what could potentially be a cure in the future. So it's a no-brainer.
We're going to the -80°C freezer. We're going to just pick up some protein for an experiment that I want to do. How did it change our lives? It changed our lives completely, in a huge way.
We slowly honed in on this idea that we want to be scientists at the bench, and we want to be applying the insights that have accumulated over these years into drug development.
This is purified prion protein. So this is the protein that causes Sonia's disease. I liked my work before. I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't hate going to work, but I love what I do now. I feel so passionate about it.
Oh, I mean, it's virtually unprecedented that two people with zero scientific background would parachute into science and start working in the laboratory to think up 4 or 5 completely different strategies for taking on a complex neurological disorder like what Sonia has. But then again, unprecedented things happen all the time in science.
They're not interested in publishing papers or in climbing the ranks of academia or in other things that motivate a lot of scientists, frankly. They just want to cure this disease.
For Eric and I think we're so lucky for so many reasons to be doing this now, to be confronting this challenge now. Oh my gosh, I count my blessings every day. Birthdays, I sort of feel like that's like another year that it didn't get me.
The hope has to be always that you find a cure. And therefore, maybe there will be a time in which we will cross out this adjective, fatal, from the name of the disease. I hope this will come.
Haley and Lachlan Webb have not yet shown any symptoms of FFI or prion disease. They're both back to work in Australia. The Italian family continues to participate in clinical trials in hopes of finding a cure. And a very happy development for Harvard PhD students Sonia and Eric. They recently embarked on a new adventure, parenthood. Thanks to advances in genetic testing, they were able to conceive a child who does not carry Sonia's disease mutation. They welcomed a healthy baby daughter on July 23rd, 2017. I'm BD Wong. Thanks for joining us. Good night.